Very good evening to everyone present here. It's happy to see people on this lovely evening. We take the pleasure in addressing the gathering as well as the well-wishers of IIT Madras and IIT Madras family. On behalf of the Office of Alumni and Corporate Relations, I would like to welcome you all for the Leadership Lecture Series. May I request Professor Mahesh Panchaknulla, the Dean of Alumni and Corporate Relations, to invite and introduce Dr. Chaitanya Baru for this LLS as the moderator of the session. Professor Mahesh, over to you.
I was on mute, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all of you. Welcome to this leadership lecture talk by Dr. Arthur Lupia. It's a delight and a pleasure to have him on this talk. And it's an added delight to have Dr. Chaitanya Baru as the moderator and the panelist, co-panelist for this talk. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Baru. Dr. Baru belongs to the class of 1979 of IIT Madras, and it's a matter of great pride to see our alumni grow to occupy the high places in many institutions of the world. He received his Bachelor of Technology degree in Electronics Engineering. Currently, Dr. Baru is a Senior Science Advisor in the Convergence Accelerator Office at the US National Science Foundation. He's there on assignment from the San Diego Supercomputer Center, which is located at the University of California in San Diego. Previously, he has served at the NSF from 2014 to 18 as Senior Advisor for Data Science in the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate. During this stint, he was instrumental in establishing a partnership between the NSF and the four major public cloud providers, namely Amazon, Google, Azure, and IBM, in support of NSF's research programs in big data and data science. Dr. Baru's research is in the areas of data science, database systems, and parallel computing. He has experience in both the academia at UCSD and previously as a faculty member in the EECS department at the University of Michigan, as well as in the industry with IBM and now in the government at NSF. He has an ME and PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Florida, where he was the recipient of the Outstanding Master's Thesis Award. It's an absolute delight to invite Chaitan to moderate this talk, which is going to be given by Dr. Lupia. Chaitan, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Mahesh. Thanks for the introduction. And it's actually now my turn to introduce our speaker. But before that, I just want to say a few words about this session. So welcome to everyone, including Dr. Lupia for this leadership lecture, which is actually being co-sponsored by this brand new YRF program, Young Research Fellows Program, which has been the brainchild of my alumni batch of 79, the 79ers. My batchmates have made huge contributions to help launch this program, which was officially launched, I believe, just a day or so ago by Director Bhaskar Ramamurthy. The contributions have been both in terms of sweat equity as well as actual funding for the first couple of years of the program. And we hope as a batch that this is going to be a continuing collaboration between our batch and the Institute. The YRF program has been made possible thanks to the leadership of IITM Director, Bhaskar Ramamurthy, many people from the 79 batch led by Naru Sharad, Subra Dravida, and many of our other batchmates who have helped in getting this off the ground. A group of over 20 or so have been fully engaged and many others have been contributing. And they have worked closely with faculty at IITM, especially Professor Preeti Agalyam and Dean Mahesh, of course. And in the first round, which was just announced, as I said, we are delighted that the YRF was able to support 27 students. So for the first time, we have an undergraduate research program there, 10 of which are women students. And the projects have come from 14 different departments. So today I'm going to introduce Dr. Lupia, Skip, and then we will He will give some remarks, after which we'll have some time for a brief sort of a chat session between us, maybe focusing on especially on the undergraduate research experience, and then time for some Q&A. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Arthur Lupia, who also goes by the name Skip. Dr. Lupia is currently Assistant Director at the US National Science Foundation for the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. He's serving there on assignment from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he's the Hal Varian Professor of Political Science. Just as a quick aside, Hal Varian himself was a professor of economics at Michigan, and then Berkeley, became the chief economist at Google, where I think he was very instrumental in setting up the pricing model for online ads, which has made Google what it is today, I guess. And Dr. Lupia himself has a BA in economics from the University of Rochester and an MS and PhD in social science from Caltech, California Institute of Technology. He has taught, interestingly enough, at the University of California, San Diego, where I am. In fact, right now I'm here. And now he's at University of Michigan, where I used to be. He has held a number of range of scientific leadership positions. He served on the advisory board of the Division of Behavioral and Social Science and Education of the National Academy of Science, and as chair of the Social, Economic, and Political Science section of the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science. He was co-founder of the Time-Sharing Experiments in Social Science, which has helped hundreds of scientists from many disciplines run innovative experiments on opinion formation and change using nationally representative subject pools. As a PI, principal investigator of the American National Election Studies, he introduced many procedural, methodological, and content innovations to one of the world's best known scientific studies of elections, which somehow seems very relevant at this moment in time in the US. He has led a number of task forces on scientific communication and research transparency, which is a very important topic, and also led and advised a number of efforts to increase transparency and data availability in scientific publishing. He has advised many scientific organizations and groups, research groups, on how to effectively communicate science to a broad and diverse audience. And once again, that's something we are finding, communicating science is becoming more and more important. Finally, Dr. Lupia has a number of honors, which I would like to mention. He is elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, a Guggenheim Fellow, an Andrew Carnegie Fellow, a Fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences, and a recipient of the American Association for Public Opinion's Innovators Award and the American Political Science Association's Ithiel de Solapool Award, and the National Academy of Sciences NAS Award for Initiatives and Research. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Skip, all yours.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, it's such an honor to be here. So the first thing I want to do is congratulate the program awardees. This is a wonderful program that people have put together. I know folks have worked very hard to get into it, and there's great opportunities ahead. It's both an honor and an opportunity, and those are two things I want to talk about today as we think about fast tracks to innovation. And really the focus is on how can research and a career in research help you bring together maybe some of the dreams that you have, some of the goals that you have, with the actions that we can actually take. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my path, and then we'll spend most of the time talking about yours. So before I get into that, it's just important to recognize our moment. So I think in everything that we try to do at NSF, we talk about science, but our main priorities are one of gratitude, and that's gratitude for everyone who is trying to help other people, trying to help their communities improve their quality of life in very challenging times. So our first, my first thought to everyone here is a spirit of gratitude for everything that you are doing. Community, the idea that we can do more together than we can do individually. So being part of a community, helping communities flourish is very important. So recognizing that. And then also health, of course. both physical health and spiritual health and mental health are very important to both get us through the current challenges, but also to see with clarity the amazing opportunities that lie ahead. So I want to thank you for your services to others. But let's talk about paths to innovation. And first, I'll quickly talk to you about my path. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a circle right here on the border of the United States and Canada. And that's where my path started. I grew up in a town that has one stoplight, and you can see a picture of it right there. But the stoplight isn't the thing that my town is most famous for. Where I grew up is most famous for this. We get a lot of snow because we are just to the right of a lake. And we have lake effect snow where the storms come over a lake and they pick up the moisture from the lake and then they dump it on the first piece of land they see, which is where I grew up. So the snow can be, just so you get a sense of it, it can be very large and you have to deal with it. So this is, part of life. When I was growing up, I'm the first person in my family to go to university. And when I was younger, I worked on a farm and in a steel mill. But I was always interested in research and science, at least from a distance. And for me, one of the allure of science is not just the discovery and, the teamwork and the taking risks. I mean, that's all a great part of science, but part of it is service, the idea that you could use the scientific method to help other people. So my journey, as Dr. Baru talked about, it started at Caltech, really in science, where I got a PhD and a master's. And one of the first projects I got to work on there was an association with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is part of NASA, our space program. So at the time, we had the International Space Station in the air, which is a permanent space laboratory where people from different countries come to do research in space. And you think about the science that you need and the research that you need to build an International Space Station and keep it in the air, it's really tremendous. And so we think about the engineering that's needed and the understanding of physics and the understanding of computer science and chemistry and so many other fields. Well, it turns out the social and behavioral sciences are really important too. And I'll show you why. If you're up in the International Space Station and you run out of certain things like screws, that hold the spaceship together, or food, it takes you 1.5 years to go to the store and get some. Amazon does not deliver into space. So if you run out of supplies, you have to fly, get a spaceship up to the station, and you have to fly back to Earth, and then you have to bring the supplies up. So that takes a long time. So you can't run out of things. So what the Jet Propulsion Lab asked the program that I was in to do was to design a price system. In other words, if you decided, well, there's something that is broken or loose and we need to put a new bolt in or a new screw in, the idea is, could we design a pricing mechanism so someone would say, well, I have to pay, 5 eggshells or 5, whatever the currency is. The idea being to make people aware of the consequences of using something right now so that you don't run out. So we'd have people from the Jet Propulsion Lab come down to our part of Caltech, and we'd run simulated markets. We would do simulations and experiments showing how different price systems affected whether the space station would run out of critical supplies or not. And again, the critical thing is, if you run out of supplies up there, it can be really bad. So these types of questions are not secondary to the mission, they're actually essential. So this was a revelation to me, the idea that you could use mathematics and social science and thinking about incentives to really try and make something amazing happen. So in my PhD, I looked a lot at how brains worked and memory and attention and so forth. And I had a background in mathematics. And so I mixed those. And so a lot of my early scholarship was trying to take facts about brains, put them into mathematical formats, and then try to talk about how we could present information in ways that could help people make really complex decisions, or how we could present information in ways that would allow teams to form where they hadn't formed before. So that's the basis of my research. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but that led to other opportunities to serve. As Dr. Baru mentioned, I was on the faculty at UC San Diego and then at the University of Michigan. I also helped to build or form a number of organizations that used scientific methods to really help people. So Climate Central is an organization that takes real data and evidence about climate and puts it into a form that can be broadcast in news and used by policymakers and so forth. The Center for Open Science is working to make more data available. The National Election Studies, as Dr. Baru mentioned, is a way to try and measure things about elections in ways that are credible and believable. And TESS is a way to run randomly controlled trial experiments so you can find causal effects in the country as a whole. I was also brought in to help the national academies and other organizations rethink how they communicate very complicated ideas. And as a result of that, I was then asked to help government solve some really big questions. How do they reduce poverty? How do they deal with infant mortality? One of the last things I'll tell you about is I was actually brought to work in Colombia. Colombia is in South America, and you may know that for 60 years, Colombia had a civil war that displaced millions of people, and there were many casualties. And so they were looking for a new way to try and end the war, new strategies. And the president of the country, and here he is, Juan Manuel Santos, asked me to come down and help him figure out a strategy that involved communication and incentives and so forth. So I did my part. And after 60 years, using the advice from myself and other people, they actually got peace. And you may know, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for that effort. So that's my path. And now my path has taken me to the National Science Foundation, where we get to support science in all fields of science and engineering, and really look to fund transformative things that will make our lives better tomorrow. And I get to work with Dr. Baru and so many other wonderful people. So that's my path. What's more important is that we talk about your path, your path to innovation. And of course, today it starts at IIT Madras. And that's the most important place to be right now in terms of thinking about what is it that you can do to bring together the dreams that you have with the actions that are available. So my path started over here, and your path starts is starting here today. And so when you think, when I was starting out, I was thinking about service. I was thinking about how could I help other people, in part because of the circumstances that I was raised in. Possible goals for people here might be to live a meaningful life, could be to improve quality of life for others. It could be to create new ways of doing things. It could be to have income. It could be combinations of these things. There's so many others. So, whatever it is, maybe think for a moment about what are your goals, okay? And then, as you have those in mind, the question I want to ask you is, what is the value of a career in research in achieving those goals? So as I mentioned before, I study memory, and I know that sometimes a long presentation can be hard to remember. So I'm just going to show you the last slide of the presentation right now. I'll show it to you again at the end, so we get a sense of the answer to the question. So the value of a career in research can do a number of things. First, it can help you establish personal credibility and legitimacy. And that matters because innovations sometimes are things you do on your own, but many times you need to work with a group or a team. And people have many opportunities to, should I work with you or someone else? And having personal credibility and legitimacy is a very valuable asset to have when you're trying to build a team around your vision. Research can help you do that. Second, it's a way to bring together your dreams and your actions. And one of the reasons is research helps you try and figure out what is possible and what is impossible. In fact, that's one of the things that research is great at, is trying to take an idea that you have and you think it's a good idea, but you actually try and evaluate, does it work? And then, if research helps you establish credibility, and if it helps you understand what is possible, that in my mind is the fast track to innovation. Those are two ways to accelerate what you do. But I know that's not how people always talk about research, right? Sometimes when you think about research, you just think about solving problems. And solving problems is a wonderful thing. Doing proofs and designing experiments and collecting data and analyzing data, it's amazing. And when people think about research, the other thing they think about is teaching. And teaching is great at all ages, whether you're teaching master's students or college students or undergraduates or elementary children, right? So these are all wonderful things that research can do. But as we think about, so that's great, but I want to talk about how research leads as a fast track to innovation. So here's another way to think about it. So what is the value of a career in research? And so let's play with the hypothesis that it's a source for credibility and legitimacy. And now you might say, well, why do I need those things? Or you might think, well, I already have them. But when you're trying to build a team, or when you're trying to express a vision to a larger and larger group of people, including people who you don't know, there's two questions that they're going to ask you. And one question might be, well, why should we pay for what you do? And it might be in terms of money, or it might be in terms of my time, or it might be in terms of, lending you materials or things like that. So that's one question people will ask when you're seeking to be an innovator and an entrepreneur and things of that nature. The other might be, well, why should we trust you? Because you say that you have this vision, but maybe I have a vision. Maybe there's something else. So these are two questions that people will ask you, particularly as you as your ambitions grow. And they're very important questions. They're the questions that we ask other people when they come to us and say, hey, will you spend your time on a project? So these are very important questions. And so particularly when you're young, it's how do you do that? I remember, this is funny, when I first went to UC San Diego, I met a dean. It was the first time I'd met the dean. I'd already been hired, and I went there, and we were at an occasion, and he comes up to me, and he was very excited to see me, and he said, "What's your major?" And I didn't quite understand what he was asking me. So he thought I was an undergraduate. He didn't know I was on the faculty. He thought I was an undergraduate. So I had to try to gently explain that, he had hired me to be on the faculty. I was personally happy that he hadn't asked me to park his car. But, so I was at a point, even though I had a PhD from Caltech, where reasonable people are saying, in effect, you don't look like someone who I should give a lot of credibility to. And that's where a career in research can really help, I think, when you're young. So here's a general situation. A lot of times when we're trying to innovate or create or transform, we're trying to help people solve a problem. We're trying to help them make better decisions. Okay, so here's one thing I know about every decision that everyone makes. Every decision relies on an evaluation. That is, every decision relies on some sort of conceptualization we have about what is going to happen if I mix two materials, what is going to happen if I try to change a built environment, what is going to happen if I think about coding in a different way. So they rely on evaluations, but every evaluation that we ever make comes from the past. All of our data, all of our evidence comes from the past. Even if it happens in the present, 2 seconds later, it is in the past. And that's both true, but it's also a little strange because most of the decisions we want to make are about the future, but all our data comes from the past. So now we need someone to be able to take evidence of the past and act responsibly with it so that they can make a claim about the future that we believe, so that it helps us make better evaluations and better decisions. So a lot of our decisions, a lot of our attempts to make progress depend on evaluations. And here's a problem that I face. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes there's lots of opinions. Sometimes everybody's got an opinion about something. So as Dr. Baru mentioned, I've studied elections. I don't know how it is in India, but in the US, everybody has an opinion. Everybody thinks they're an expert, on the elections, and people know things. But if you want to build something credible and new and tangible, not all of the advice is equally helpful. Let's say that you're in a situation where you want to, help a community or build a new product or build a company, whatever your journey is. There's a question. There are many people who claim, well, here's the way we should go forward. But one question is, well, why should we believe you? Which evaluation should we believe? So there are two principles that affect the types of evaluation that human beings believe. And so one is credibility. We are more likely to listen to something and to think about it and to incorporate it into our subsequent thoughts if we think that there's something about another person, something about what they're saying that makes it believable or trustworthy. Sometimes it's because we know them, right? We have had experiences with them before. They have said things in the past that were true. In some cases, maybe they have a PhD or a degree from a university, and you know that they have a certain major and they've been trained in a way. You usually need some reason, something about the person to make it credible. Another thing we need is legitimacy, and legitimacy is just as important. So legitimacy is the idea that I have a sense of how you came to know what you claim to know. The reason legitimacy matters is when we're working on really hard problems, sometimes people come into a room and they have different points of view. If we have legitimacy, what that means is I might initially disagree with you, or you might initially disagree with me. But if I understand how you came to your conclusion, I might be able to say, well, I don't agree with that, but I understand why you came to that conclusion. And if we both see each other's arguments as legitimate, we now have an opportunity to build. We now have an opportunity to build coalitions and teams and new understandings. Because if I think about how you think about something and you think about how I think about it, and we're just not thinking about ourselves, we have an opportunity to build greater understanding. And that's the key to teamwork. And in so many cases, that's the way to have innovation, because it's when you bring these different views of a problem together, and it's the mixture of those views that leads to the revelation. So one way to talk about the value of a career in research is that it's a source for creating credible and legitimate evaluations. So this is Richard Feynman, who's a very, very famous physicist. He was at Caltech when I was there. I met him once. I was not at the 1974 commencement address because I was 10 then. But at this commencement address, he said very important things about what science is, about what research is, and they've stuck with me. I mean, they are principles by which I live, both when I do research, but also when I try to serve others. So Feynman said, scientific integrity corresponds to a kind of utter honesty, a kind of leaning over backwards, right? To do what? To give all of the information that help others judge the value of your contribution, not just the information that leads you to one particular direction. And that's the beautiful thing about research if you commit to it, because you may come in and you think you know how something's going to work. But if you commit to research, sometimes you find out that what you thought was true, and that's great. But sometimes you find out that it's not quite true, and then that leads you to improve, and then that leads you to innovate, and that can give you real advantages. Moreover, if other people know that you have done that, like if I am a scientist and I show you how I've done what I've done, maybe you don't agree with me at first, but you can look at my methods, you can look at the paper, you can look at my code, you can look at my data, and you can say, well, I see how you came to that conclusion. And now let's work together to see how to reconcile our differences. So even as a young person, if someone says, you look like you should park my car, like that happened to me, that you might look like you don't know very much, but when you use the scientific method, people say, oh, well, maybe I should listen to this. So the value of a career in research is it can make you more credible and legitimate. All right, and that's when you're young, it's really, really important. But you might say, but does that really apply to me? So I want to give you one other example, and it's a little more controversial, but it's helped me a great deal. So to be an innovator, to help a community, it's important at certain moments to be able to claim that you know something, right? And so what does it mean to know something? And so a knowledge claim, if you break it down, it's an assertion that a particular phenomenon is or isn't in a particular category. So if I say that Donald Trump is the president of the United States, I'm saying that an object called Donald Trump is in the category of president of the United States, right? Where if I say that Joe Biden is not right now the president of the United States, I'm claiming that he is not in that category. So every knowledge claim is a claim that some sort of phenomena is or isn't in a category. All right, so how do we defend knowledge claims? And it turns out there are 4 ways to defend a knowledge claim. Collectively, they are exhaustive. These are all the ways that you can defend, you can claim to know something. You can say, here's why I think I know it. Collectively, these 4 things are exhaustive, but they're not mutually exclusive. So sometimes we use more than one of these methods. But let me show you the 4 ways of knowing. So the first way of knowing is an appeal to metaphysics. You can say, there are forces beyond our ability to perceive, our ability to sense, that make certain things true or false. And maybe there are people in our community who have greater access to these metaphysical concepts, and they will help us understand what is true and false. Many conversations about morality and ethics, particularly when they are related to historical or cultural stories or theological stories, are appeals to metaphysics. So I know something is right or wrong because there's this metaphysical concept that validates the claim. So throughout history and around the world, that has been a powerful way of knowing. A second way of knowing is personal testimony. So, you say that you know something, and the reason that you know it is something happened to you. And when something happened to you, you had a feeling about it. So when I was a teenager, I was in a car accident, right? It's very memorable. And so there are certain things I can tell you about that were true for me and I felt them, right? So I can tell you that I know something about that. I don't know whether it's true for you, but I can say that I know it because it was true for me. Okay. So so far we've talked about two ways of knowing things. One is appeals to metaphysics, and the other is personal testimony. A third way of thinking about things is everything in between metaphysics, you can call it God or whatever you want it, and individual people. So maybe we call that culture. Maybe culture contains history and architecture and music, but it's basically ways that we take ideas or representations of the past and convert them to use for understanding the present. So when we say, well, we know that something is true because historically something happened, we take little tiny bits of history and we use them to say, well, this is why something is true now. Maybe we look at a painting, or we look at a movie, or we look at a building, or we look at legislation, and we say, this is why something is true now. So these are three ways of knowing that are often used. But now I want to point to a fourth. And the fourth is science. Okay. So imagine for a moment that I have an object in my hand, and it has a big red button here and a big green light right here. And when I press the button, the light goes on. And you say, wow, that's amazing. Would that work for me? Like, how do I know? And I might say, well, I use the scientific method to develop this object and to evaluate it. And I'm going to show you how I took observations from the world to build it. I'm going to show you how I analyzed how it would work. And I'm going to show you how I interpreted my analyses to create the object. And I'm going to show you this with such clarity that this light, that you'll see that this light not only works for me, it will work for you. And anybody who had the same materials that I had and took these steps could build the same instrument. So when you use the scientific method and you're transparent as you can be about your observations, your analysis, and your interpretations, the validity of the claim you're making to know depends less on your faith, experiences, and culture. Again, this is not to say that those are wrong, because sometimes you need those references to understand a situation. But what science can do, particularly when you're a young person, is it gives you an ability to make claims that other people should see as legitimate, right? Even if they're not necessarily sure that you're old enough to make the decision. So what research empowers us to do is make strong intersubjective claims. And intersubjective is that key word. So what intersubjective means is there's a basis for believing it that doesn't depend on the person who made it. Again, when you're young and you might not look like the person that should be the authority, but if you conduct research in a certain way, right, the ability to make these intersubjective claims that don't depend on you, anyone who followed the process would have come to the same conclusion, that can become a powerful thing. And the ability to make strong intersubjective claims gives us some things. One, it gives us a way to establish personal credibility and legitimacy, right? It is a way to do it. You can say it doesn't, I'm 19 years old, I'm 23 years old, and yet I used a method that if anyone uses it, they'll get the same answer. The second thing that it does is when you demonstrate you can do this, now you can use it to test hypotheses about whether your idea is going to work or not. And that allows you to reconcile your aspirations and actions. And when you can do that, now you have the ability to show other people, I have an idea and it works. Or I had an idea and it doesn't work, but here's why, and let's improve it. And those are powerful things to have. And if you have both of those things, credibility, legitimacy, and really clarity, right? I think that research can give you great, even when you study complex things, research can give you great clarity. It's the combination of credibility, legitimacy, and clarity that will draw other people to you, right? That will help people think that maybe your ideas and your approach are worth thinking about. And whether you want to improve quality of life for your family, build a community, build a company, there's certain things we can do on our own. But when we are able to work with other people, and we're able to work with other people in a generous spirit, but one that has clarity and legitimacy, there's so many things we can do. And in my experience, that's been a fast track to innovation. So when we think about what's the value of a career in research, I think it offers the credibility, legitimacy, and clarity that we need to build fast tracks to innovation. I know it helped me in this situation because this gentleman was trying to reduce poverty by 10% and end a 60-year civil war. And he's asking me, what should I do? And there's no reason for him to believe, what someone says when they came from this. But I had the fortune, like you do, to go to a research university and to learn, how to conduct research that's credible and legitimate. And through that, you've got a great ability to perform a service. And that service is helping people see what's possible, helping people understand how to take the fast track to the goal that they want. So that's the basic story that I have. And I would be very happy to have a conversation now and answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Wow, that was wonderful, Skip. Totally fascinating. And actually, so as you said, this is one of the, you can add to the list of benefits of doing research or whatever it is, that you could be in organizations like our universities where you can hear such interesting talks from so many different perspectives. So as a computer scientist and an engineer, the way you put things, it's an angle that I had never really thought about, but it all makes so much sense, and it's great. And to the audience, I also want to mention that that's another aspect of even being at the National Science Foundation. I don't know if people fully know that many people who are at NSF, maybe almost half of the people at NSF, maybe a little less, actually are called rotators, just like Skip and I are. We come from universities, spend a few years at the NSF, doing whatever, helping the research cause, and then we go back, which makes NSF an even equally interesting place because you get to meet so many interesting folks there. So I just wanted to make that comment. I know that we thought we would first have a conversation and go to Q&A, but I'm actually seeing a couple of very interesting questions here, so we can mix it up. Basically, it can be a mix of questions from the audience and questions maybe from me to you. So let me ask this one, which Harsha Krishna, actually he has two interesting questions. I'll ask the one he asked second first, which was, you mentioned something very interesting in the beginning of your talk, which is about service-oriented mentality, which, by the way, even I found extremely interesting. Unfortunately, due to the immense competition, there is a tendency in India to forego social values and community service in lieu of better academic achievement. Do you see this changing in the US? So I assume he means, could the US also end up being more like that? How do you think this can be instilled into training researchers? I assume, how do you instill this service-oriented mentality into researchers versus just the pure competitive mentality?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So thank you for asking it. I think that we're all countries in the world now are having a challenging time with COVID and the economic effects. And I think I don't know how it is in India, but in social media and on television, sometimes they focus on the most sensational and depressing aspects of our situation. And there are very, bad things going on. At the same time, I think for many people in the United States, these challenges have woken people up and led them to realize how much strong communities and a dedication to science and facts affects their lives, right? It's not so fun to, it's probably better in India. In the US, that's very hard to put on TV and have people watch because, people would rather see fighting and arguing and things of that nature. But I think when I'm still at a university and I see, a great deal, I think I've seen an increase in compassion, an increase in empathy and people wanting to do things to help others. The protests that we had in America about Black Lives Matter and racial equality, I think are emblematic of that. This awakening that there were a group of people that were systematically suffering these things that people sort of knew about before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it became very focal. So I think at some level there is a change, but it's not a change of everyone. So I'll just be honest about that. In terms of teaching it, I think about research and communication as deeply ethical activities. Anytime an expert says something, we're going to know things about what we said that our audience doesn't know because naturally we're experts. And so I think that we have a strong ethical obligation to think about what our words do to other people, how they affect other people. So, you know, I believe deeply in teaching ethics when we teach research, because, you know, we have a workflow, you know, where at the beginning we discover and then we build things and then we put them out in the field. I think it's very important always at the beginning of your research to think about the people at the end of your workflow, the people who are going to be affected, and just, you know, try to commit to making their lives better. That doesn't mean you can't build a company, right? That doesn't mean you can't do really amazing things. But if you forget people or you only think about them at the end, the outcomes can be very bad. I think that some of the social media companies based in the United States have come to realize that, that they built a device that everybody could be on. And then after it was built, they're like, oh, there could be problems here. And now they're really struggling. I'm thinking about Facebook in particular. They're really struggling with you know, what their ethical obligations are. So I think teaching ethics is very important. I have a bias. I also think teaching mathematics is very important, because mathematics, I think, should make mathematics. I love mathematics, and it's infinite. You know, there's like an infinite number of correspondences and types of, you know, things that you can characterize with mathematics. Mathematics both give you logical rigor, and it should give you humility. Like, no one can ever know all of math, like not even close. So if you take math seriously, it gives you humility about what you can know. And I think if you're trying to act ethically and you're trying to build and innovate responsibly, the humility that math and the rigor, the simultaneous that math gives you, I think it's a very good thing to have.
That's great. Actually, you pretty much walked into his other, Harsha Krishna had another question, which I'll still ask because it was about ethics, because maybe it's useful to drill down a little bit on that, in the sense to say something about what maybe specific universities, particular universities may be doing, say Michigan, or what NSF might be doing in this area. So the question was, in the current populist and polarizing environment, can you describe the role of ethics as a researcher, which you just did really, and being able to go against popular opinions held by political leaders and sometimes your own family and friends? I mean, this sounds very familiar to all of us, I'm sure. But I thought I'll ask that, give you a chance to sort of drill down a little bit more onto that issue.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me answer it in a slightly different way. So my research is actually on how people make very difficult decisions when they know very little, and then how you can sort of convey information and stuff like that. So here's something I now know about persuasion. Like, if you want to try and change somebody else's mind about something, which is one thing you might want to do if you're talking about science. Persuasion is 95% listening. 95 is not a real number, but the point is, when we are trying to build a communicative relationship with someone, when we're trying to build an understanding, it is very, very important to listen. And the reason is not primarily ethical. It's that the limits on human attentive capacity are great. So the human attentive system has two properties. One is it helps us focus on objects. It helps us take something from our environment and focus on, say, that's an object. The other thing that our human attentive system does is, when we're focusing on an object, it blocks out everything else we could pay attention to. And that's also true when we speak. And it's also true when we write and give presentations. So if you want to try to have a conversation with someone in a polarized setting, or in a setting where there's misinformation, the most important thing to be able to build is trust, because trust is the thing that helps someone else feel safer listening to you and thinking about what you're doing. But trust often comes from the ability to have empathy. And the ability to have empathy comes from me understanding your journey and you understanding my journey. So when I'm in a room with people in a tense situation, like, the first thing I try and figure out is, why are they here? And what do they want? And what do they need to come out of the room with? And then I'm going to use a math term. I try to find the intersection between why they're in the room and what it is I want to say. And what I talk about is that intersection. So if people are, really fearful about the future, the first thing, I try to do is acknowledge and validate that they have those concerns, and then use that as a way to think through, well, what are things we could do to make our lives better or to overcome this problem? So I think I answered the second part of your question first. But in terms of ethics, I think I'm sorry, I don't remember both parts of the question now, but
Well, that's fine. It was just about in the current environment. Can you describe the role of ethics as a researcher?
yeah, I will say,
And how do you go against I guess current popular opinion when everyone around you is opining about things?
Yeah, on that point, the scientific method is a great ally. Um, the thing that I have been able to do, and many people can do this, is I can say something unpopular, right? I can say something that everybody thinks is wrong, but I can show people my data. I can show people my design. I can show them the proofs. I'm like, it's all here. Show me what part, you can feel free to do this. Here's one powerful thing you can have as a scientist. You should always ask yourself the question, how could I be wrong? And so when you present something that people can make mistakes. But if I'm making a claim that other people don't like, I don't call them names or anything. I just try to present as much information as I can. And I show me where I'm wrong. Like, I would love to learn where I am wrong, because then I can help all of us, learn together. So sometimes people don't want to engage you. They just want to yell at you and say, no, you're, and there's nothing, I can't win all of the battles, but I feel like, any opportunity I have to help people, to empower people to see a more accurate version of something they care about, I should try and take that. And I just, even at my age, I don't expect people to believe me. Like, I don't walk into a room and say people should believe me because I have a PhD. I expect people to believe my claims because they know how I came up with it. And they know that the claim doesn't depend on the fact that I made it, that any human being who did this sequence of actions would come up with that. And I think that that's how I prevail. And I've been in situations in multiple countries where I've said unpopular things, but it's never, here's a trick. I'll tell you what it is. When I'm presenting something like that, what I try to emphasize with people is, my point in saying this is not to show you how smart I am. My point in saying this is to show you how smart you are. I'm going to give you the evidence. I'm going to give you the logic, and you can figure it out on your own. Doesn't have to be, I can leave, right? But I feel like sometimes people are more receptive to information if you say, I'm going to show you how smart you are.
Yeah.
Right? And then I'm going to leave. And when I leave, if you want to say this is your idea, that's fine with me. That's one way that I try to do it.
Great. There are a lot of wonderful questions here, but I'm going to go around a little bit so that maybe we get a variety of questions that I can ask you. So here's one from Subra Dravida, which says, since you work at the intersection of neuroscience and social sciences, how do you see the role of technology in teaching children, especially rural children, which is a big factor, of course, in India, but even here? What are the roles of technology versus the teacher? Will technology make the students self-learners, or is there still a powerful role for teachers, human teachers?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. And let me just, I'll answer it, but let me say I don't consider myself an expert in a lot of, sort of education related fields. But I help to lead the Future of Work project at NSF, and I work, so we'll always need teachers, because learning, so here's a key thing about learning. I actually can't teach you anything, and you can't teach me anything. Like, it's biologically impossible, right? What I can do is create a circumstance where you teach yourself, and you can create a circumstance where I teach myself. In other words, when we try to teach someone, what we do is we make variations in sound and light. I'm making variations in sound with my mouth that sound like words to you, and I make variations in light either by moving my body, or I show you images and slides. Those are the only two things I can do, is make variations in sound and light. To the extent that any subsequent memory is formed, any subsequent feeling is formed, that's all done by someone else. That's all done by someone who hears the sounds and who looks at the images and who thinks about them with respect to what they already know. And almost all of the interesting things that happens in a learning act happens between the ears and slightly above of the student. So for that reason, we will always need teachers, because people have different backgrounds and different circumstances and different experiences. And so there will always be cases where we talk about a concept and we think about it one way, but if we have 30 students, they might think about them, they might hear 30 different things. The great thing technology can do is to help us understand the different ways people are seeing things, right? And to the extent that it's important that everyone in a class learns a certain concept, a teacher might be able to use technology to see that maybe this student and this student understand it completely, but maybe this student and this student don't. But what technology can do is not just tell us that these two students don't understand it yet, they might be able to tell us why, so that the teacher can maybe send a message to say, well, maybe think about it this way, or here's a different example. And because we have data, we'll know that students in the past who have not understood this concept for that reason, right, when they're shown the alternate example, they understand it. Right now, that's so hard without technology. That's so hard for a teacher to do. So, when I was in school, you had 30 students in a classroom and there was one teacher, and they found out whether you knew things or not when you had a test. And if you only had a test every 2 weeks, that means 2 weeks, maybe a student has no idea what's going on and the teacher doesn't find out. Moreover, when I was young, when the student didn't figure it out, well, it's the student's fault. And you certainly need to work hard, but sometimes, the student can be capable, but it might be the teacher who doesn't know the right example to use to communicate. Maybe the student is capable of learning and technology would help the teacher more easily do it. So I think we will always need teachers. And I think technology, if we really think about education in a creative way, can empower teachers, can transform teaching and make it so that, you convey so much more in short periods of time. We have to worry about misuse of it too. But if you're asking me about what's possible, I think, amazing things are possible.
Great. I'll switch to another question that's about science communications. And in some ways, you've touched, I think, on those kinds of issues already. But this is from Aniket Shevade. Do you think that we need a better mechanism for science communication as we see an increase in skepticism in common public? In my opinion, good science communication is essential if research has to serve people more. How can this problem be solved?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
And as you know, Skip, it's not a problem maybe only in India, it's becoming a problem in the US.
Everywhere. It's a very good question. And just here's one reason that science communication seems more important is because science is actually more important than ever. So in the US, sometimes when we worry about science communication, we say, yeah, because some people doubt climate change and some people are skeptical about vaccines. And those are true. There is some skepticism about them. But 99% of what science studies actually helps people and they're accepted. The scientists don't worry about them. We just worry about the 2 or 3 problems where there's doubt. So science at some level is more important than ever. And it's a big part of our culture and our society. At the same time, because it is so important, you have people, sometimes, I don't know if this happens in India, you have people in the US who present themselves as scientists who aren't really, who don't really follow the method. They just want power or influence. And so they, and they don't have the legitimacy. So I think that science communication is very important, but it's really hard, right? Because it's not just saying words that people understand. Every act of science communication involves a compression. And here's what I mean by this. Suppose that we are, you and I write a paper and we're studying an object or a relationship or a phenomenon. And let's just for the sake of argument say there were 5 things about the phenomena that we could study. So there are five parts. And then we have a scientific method. So we collect data about the object, we take the data and we categorize it, and then we take the categories and we analyze them, and then we take the analysis and we interpret it, and then we talk about it. So now I've just named a 5-step scientific process. So the conclusion that we would draw comes from a 5-dimensional object and a 5-step process. So at a minimum, there are 5 times 5 elements to the story of what the conclusion is. You can't, a common sentence that can't have 25 elements in it. And moreover, if we try to tell people everything about that process, sometimes they fall asleep and they don't hear anything. And so a key challenge for science communication is how do we stay true to the most important parts of the scientific discovery for our audience, but doing that while we necessarily compress it, right? That is a huge challenge. It's something we can do. You don't have to choose between being truthful and being heard, right? You just have to think about how to convey things. But as I mentioned before, when you recognize that good science communication requires compression, that's where the ethics come in. Because ultimately, if you and I are writing a paper, we're going to communicate to a lay audience, we're making all the decisions about what to say and what not to say. And our audience isn't going to know a lot about what we didn't say. And so the ethical implication for us is we have to choose what we're going to say so that that audience walks away more informed and not less informed. So to answer your question again, science communication is really important and it's really hard, but it isn't impossible to do, and it's totally worthwhile.
Okay, so this might be our last question. There's about 3 minutes. We might be able to go. This is being recorded, so maybe we can, a minute or two is maybe okay. But it actually is the kind of question I was going to ask you as we engaged in, the relevance of research, especially from undergrads and so on. But this question from Mahesh Wadaga says, if one pursues a career in research, that would be going deep into a single topic, which may be very narrow. Won't it become won't it reduce the scope for getting that person a job after completing a PhD? So it's, maybe you can spin this as a more broad question about why should somebody do a research? Why should someone go get a PhD and so on? And this probably will be our last question.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good question. So my background is largely in mathematics, and so I have a bias. And my bias is that the space of knowable things is infinite. That is, even if the number of objects we could study scientifically is finite, the number of categories we could use to characterize those objects are infinite, because we're human beings and we can think of all kinds of ways to slice things, and right. So there's an infinite number of things we can study. When you make a choice about what field to go in, often what makes you useful to others is helpful, is knowing a combination of things that other people don't know. So sometimes that combination can be, 19 mathematical concepts, and other people only know 2 or 3 of them, and that makes you a great expert on math. But another possibility, and I think what's true in my career, is I tell people, I actually told the President of Columbia, we're having these conversations and things are working. He's like, how do you know these things? He says, how do you know these things? And I told him, I said, Mr. President, I only know 2 or 3 things, but you just keep asking me questions where those 2 or 3 things are the answer, right? If you ask me any other question, I'm not going to know, right? And so as you think about specializing and you think about what your desires are and what you love to do and who you want to serve or whatever you want to accomplish, I think choose a field or a specialization or a topic that resonates with that, right? And then, if you can find a set of things that interest you, like with math, I hate my math abilities. Like I think there's so much I don't know. But when I walk into rooms with other people, they're like, but you're the expert. Because I know what I don't know, but I know this combination of math and neuroscience and some other things that apparently nobody else knows. That's strange to me. And so I can be helpful. So I think it's the combinations of things that can make you useful. And so my advice is find a combination of things that challenge you, but that are also consistent with the journey that you want to take. And if you can listen a little bit to what other people want, and you can sort of get a sense of whose journeys are similar to yours, then you find a set of skills that ultimately you can use. I mean, my dissertation has a 60-page mathematical appendix that I'm sure like 6 people have ever read. So, that's really obscure, but because I had to work through that problem, there are all these other things like this conversation that I'm able to do now because I had to think about a set of things, and then I combine them with neuroscience and I combine them with politics, and people find that useful. So I think it's the combinations that matter, not so much the depth.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that is it's the research method, right? So I think one way to think about if you're going to do research is not that you're going to become an expert in something very narrow. It doesn't, first of all, doesn't have to be narrow. As Skip said, it could be multiple fields. but also that what you're learning is a way of thinking and a way of doing. And that way of thinking and doing will help you wherever you go, really, even if it's not a research thing, because you're thinking more objectively, you're understanding who's an expert, who's not an expert, because you've become an expert. And so you know what that means. So, which are all the things that Skip just said in his talk. So I think you should think of it as a journey that's going to help add attributes to you and help add skills to you. It also turns out that you know something a lot about some area that others don't know. Fine, but you also pick up a lot of skills, I think. Okay, great. That was a wonderful presentation. As you may have noticed, this is being recorded, and I believe it will be on the YouTube channel for IITM. So a lot of folks will be able to see. I've already received emails from folks saying how much they've enjoyed this presentation. There was a request for your slides. I'll ask you offline if those slides can be made available.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to switch this back to, is it Mahesh or Rutra? Do you want to say anything or?
Before winding up, there is a general announcement to the audience. So it will be great if you could spend 5 seconds by responding to the feedback that will be coming up in the screen. So it will be up for half a minute. Your feedback is so valuable to assure, and then it will help us to grow. So I'll just.
I want to take this opportunity to thank Skip. Skip, that was a fascinating, fantastic talk. Thank you very much, and for your comments and for your insights into a very complex topic. I think all of us are going through very difficult times with COVID on one side, with politics polarizing societies all over the world. I think your thoughts are certainly, our grapple hold on science is going to have to go, is going to have to become stronger, and that's the only way to get through these difficult times. Thank you very much for making time to talk to us, and we look forward to many more such fascinating talks, Chaitan. And thank you for your help in making this happen as well. Okay. Good night,
Right.
goodbye, and
Thanks.
good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Namaste.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sweta. It's done.
Done. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Sumanana, bye.
Bye, bye, bye.